is my 1994 Audi RS2 Avant, and I'm selling it on Cars and Bids. This is one of the greatest fast wagons of all time, and one of the coolest cars I've ever owned. But I've had it for about 2.5 years, and it's time to move on. Today, I'm going to explain why I'm selling it, and I'm going to take you on a tour of my RS2 and show you all of its quirks and features, in case you might be interested in buying it. Before I get to the rest of this video, yes, my RS2 is for sale, and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids with no reserve. This is one of the coolest fast wagons of all time, Audi's first ever RS car, and it's finished in gorgeous Nogaro blue, although back then they called it RS blue. This is an extremely special car, and you can buy it on Cars and Bids. So, once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to head over to the live auction for my RS2, where you can bid on it and buy it with no reserve, only on Cars and Bids. Alright, time to talk RS2. So, here's how this video is going to go. First, I'm going to go over kind of the basics of this car and what makes it special. Then, I'll move on to how I have enjoyed the car, how I have used it in the time that I've owned it, and what has been great about it to me. Then I'll talk about why I am selling the RS2, and finally I'll go over some of the flaws that this car has, just so your eyes are wide open in case you're interested in it. But let's start with the basics, because the genesis of how this car came to be is a rather interesting topic. So here's the deal. This car was built together by Audi and Porsche, co-developed by the two, and actually built by Porsche in Zuffenhausen in Stuttgart on the factory grounds right by where they build the 911. This car came out of the Porsche factory. In fact, it has a lot of Porsche parts on it. You can see the brakes, the brake calipers say Porsche. That's because the brakes came from a 968 Club Sport. The wheels, these are 4 front wheels from the 911 Turbo from this era. 4 fronts stuck on the RS2 to make a square setup. The rear view mirrors on the outside also come from the Porsche 911 from this era, and the same is true of this front turn signal fog light assembly, borrowed straight from Porsche 911 models and stuck on the Audi RS2. Open up the hood and you can see stamped onto the engine it says powered by Porsche. This car uses a 2.2 liter turbo 5-cylinder from Audi, but Porsche tuned the car, added some performance parts in order to get power up. The result was around 310 horsepower, which is a huge boost compared to other Audi turbo models that use this engine, and that's because of all the performance stuff that Porsche added to make it more performance-y. You even had Porsche on the badge for this car, the emblem. You can see Audi in one corner and Porsche along the bottom in the famous Porsche script to denote the fact that this car was co-built between Audi and Porsche. Under the hood, even the VIN plate says Audi Porsche for manufacturer, not just Audi. This really was a dual manufactured car by both brands collaboratively, and that's reflected pretty much everywhere throughout this car. Now, the reason that Audi and Porsche worked together on this car is rather interesting. These days, Audi and Porsche are both conjoined under the Volkswagen Group umbrella, but back then, they were totally separate, totally independent brands that had no real reason to work together, except that each brand offered something the other needed. For Audi, it was credibility. Young people don't believe me when I tell them this, but back in the late 80s and early 90s, Audi was nowhere near on the level of BMW and Mercedes like they are today. At that time, Audi was thought of as sort of a weird esoteric brand, almost like Saab, instead of BMW and Mercedes. And Audi wanted to prove itself in the luxury performance car realm in order to boost its reputation to help it compete with Mercedes and BMW. And they figured that Porsche could help them do that. The Porsche name on an Audi would definitely boost their rep, and indeed it did. And this is the creation of that. Now, Porsche needed something from Audi, and that was money. Again, young people today find this very hard to believe because Porsches are incredibly popular right now. Everybody wants old Porsches, new Porsches. It's the hottest brand in the world. And Porsches that would have been throwaway used cars 20 years ago are now selling for gazillions of dollars. But back in the early 90s, Porsche was in dire straits. Sales volume had slowed to a trickle. People weren't really buying the cars. They were outdated. They didn't have that much money, so they took on a few special projects. Just before the RS2 came out, Porsche built the Mercedes-Benz 500e, which was basically a high-performance version of Mercedes E-Class. And then, once that went out of production, Porsche built the Audi RS2. Both brands kind of used the Porsche tie-in for credibility, and Porsche just needed their cash. So for Audi, the result of their Porsche tie-in was the RS2, one of the coolest fast wagons of all time and one of the very first. This was a car that was at the very beginning of the fast wagon genre, which is now one of the coolest car enthusiast segments there is. This car was also the very first Audi RS car. In fact, the RS name was suggested by Porsche, who had used RS on a few of its own cars, and they told Audi that they thought it gave a certain credibility, felt sporty and racy and sporty, and so the RS line was born, and of course it continues to this day. Now in the end, the RS2 was built from 94 to 96, and about 2,900 of these were manufactured. None were sold here in the United States. Any RS2 here in North America has been privately imported, and they all had a turbo 5-cylinder, about 310 horsepower, like I said, a manual transmission, and all-wheel drive. That was every RS2. So those are the RS2 basics, but let me tell you about my time with this car, how I've used it, and what it means to me. I bought this car in the fall of 2020, October 2020, so I've had it about 2.5 years. And I bought it because I had just launched Cars and Bids, and I was unbelievably stressed out by running a startup basically from zero, and I wanted something that I could enjoy, something new and fun that was kind of a win. While I was constantly stressed in my private life, I had something that was like fun and new and cool and interesting. And I'd always wanted an RS2, and so I went and found one. Now, I bought this car off market. It was never officially listed for sale in any capacity. The previous owner of this car had known that I was looking for an RS2. I had mentioned it in a couple of videos. He sent me an email. One thing led to another. We started talking, and that's how I ended up buying this car. Now, the previous owner was in Canada. He was in Alberta in Western Canada, and so I had to import the car to the United States. And in fact, this car has led quite a global life. It was sold new in Germany, and then it was imported to Japan, and then it was imported to Canada in 2009, and then I imported it to the States in late 2020. So this is this car's 4th country and 3rd continent. It's really gotten around, but that's kind of what happens to special cars like this. Now, over the time that I have owned this RS2, I've really loved it, I've really enjoyed it, and I've really used it. Like I said, 2.5 years with it, and in that time I've driven it about 4,100 miles. So I really have put some miles in the car and enjoyed it. And frankly, 4,100 miles in 2.5 years is pretty good considering I don't have a traditional commute, and my car fleet now numbers 10 vehicles somehow. It's insane. But I gotta use all of the cars and spread it around, and I've used this one quite a bit in the time that I've had it. I've done a lot of stuff with it, but the most important and most memorable thing I did with my RS2 was I brought my baby boy home from the hospital in it when he was born. So about 1.5 years ago, my wife and I had a little baby boy, and I convinced her that I wanted to bring him home from the hospital in this car. So that also meant driving to the hospital when she was in labor in this car. That happened at 1 a.m. I still remember carefully driving while my wife is having contractions into the hospital in the RS2, and then unloading it with all our bags, and then parking it to await the arrival of my son with a car seat waiting inside. That was definitely the most memorable drives I've had in this car and the most special thing I've done with it. But I've used this RS2 in a lot of other, well, station wagon-y ways, frankly. I've had no qualms at all about sticking my dog in this car, driving him to the beach. That's what a wagon is for. Or sticking a big stroller in the back of the car and driving it off somewhere to take a walk or do something with my son. This car has been used like a wagon, people inside, stuff in the back, which I think is how it was intended. I've also enjoyed the car for its sort of understated demeanor. At the end of the day, for most people, this is just an old Audi station wagon, but for me, it's been kind of a cool if you know sort of car. You show up at Cars and Coffee and it's a big hit among people who get it. And occasionally driving on the road, you'll encounter someone who freaks out seeing an Audi RS2 for the first time because they know. Otherwise, it kind of flies under the radar. It's a very special car enthusiast car, but not necessarily an everybody freaks out all the time car, which is kind of a neat position to be in. You only really get to talk to people who understand why it's special. So with all of that in mind, with this car's awesome history and with how much I've loved and used this car over the last couple of years, you might be wondering why? Why am I selling it? Why am I getting rid of my beloved RS2? And the answer is, well, first off, it has nothing to do with the fact that I just bought the Carrera GT. At absolutely unrelated, totally separate situations. I did not buy that to replace this. I know people are going to say that on the internet. That is not the situation. In fact, I have 4 garage spots now in California at my house. So I have 4 spaces for 4 fun cars. And that's what I have. My Ford GT, Carrera GT, G500 Cabriolet, and this. I have room for all 4 cars. I'm not getting rid of it for that reason at all. Instead, it's because, well, it's just time for something else. It's been 2.5 years. It's been over 4,000 miles, and I kind of feel like I've gotten what I wanted to out of this car. I've enjoyed it. I've used it. I've photographed it in cool places. I've had fun with it, brought my kid home from the hospital, cool things. And now maybe it's just time to see what else is out there. This car hasn't really given me any trouble. It hasn't provided me with any major reason to get rid of it other than I've had it. It's been fun. It's been cool. And now it's time to move on. And of course, that's especially true after this recent news that you've probably heard about Cars and Bids. We've taken an investment in Cars and Bids, which has given me some extra money, obviously, hence the Carrera GT. And that extra money has given me, a car enthusiast who wants to try everything, the desire to try some other new stuff. So I've enjoyed this car, but now I have the budget to go out and try a few other vehicles that I've always wanted to. In fact, I have a list that I've been keeping for years on my phone of cars that I really want to own at some point. And that list has about 20 or 25 cars on it. And I'm already 35 years old, so if I have one every year or two, you could do the math. I better start getting going on this. I never really saw myself as the kind of person who just hoarded cars, who kept adding and adding and adding and just had this massive collection. You go to a lot of those collections and you discover that people add cars, but they don't really keep them up. They can't drive them all that often, and they just kind of waste away unless you have like a Jay Leno situation with in-house mechanics, and that is definitely not my situation. So I kind of need to sell a car if I'm going to buy another one in order to keep my life and my cars manageable. And so thus it's just time to sell the RS2. It's been a great 2.5 years. It's been a great car. I really think this is the best looking car I have ever owned. I love looking at it. I love seeing it. I really enjoy driving it. But on to the next thing. So with all of that in mind, let me talk you through the flaws that I know about with this car, and I'll walk you through some of the stuff that I have done to this car over my 2.5 years of ownership. Now, in terms of flaws, it's kind of a surprise. Despite this car's reputation as a 90s Audi, it's actually been dead reliable. This car has started every single time I have tried to start it. It's never left me stranded. It's never had weird performance issues or engine problems. It has always worked great. That's a testament to the care that the prior owner gave this car. He fixed everything, was on top of all maintenance. He was amazing about it. And this car came to me with a giant stack of paperwork, all receipts, all work he had done over the 10 years that he had owned the car before me. Now, the 3 major things that I did to the car once I got it are, number 1, new tires. Right after I bought the car, I put a new set of Michelin Pilot Sport tires on this car about 2.5 years ago. I also added the blue interior interior. You can see the blue seat inserts up front and in back, and the blue Alcantara inserts on the door. That was a factory option for the RS2, but this car wasn't equipped with it. This RS2 came standard with a full black leather interior, but I put in the blue inserts because I thought they just looked cool. The upholsterer who did this blue interior even added little Recaro script to the front seats to make them look especially cool and especially original. He did an amazing job, and frankly, you could never really tell that this interior was anything but this cool blue Alcantara. It looks great. Now, the other noticeable upgrade I did to this car also came to the interior. These were offered with wood trim or with carbon fiber look trim, and this one came with the wood. But the carbon fiber is cooler. It kind of more fits this car's ethos, and so I had all of the wood trim wrapped in carbon fiber. This wrap was done by Elite Finish, which is the best cosmetic detail shop here in San Diego, and they did a great job. You can't even really tell that it's been wrapped. These look like actual carbon fiber pieces, but they are in fact not. It is the wood trim wrapped in carbon fiber. But by doing those things, the blue interior and the carbon fiber trim, it gave me the perfect interior to match the perfect exterior for this car. Now, as for flaws, there are a few. This is, after all, a 90s Audi, and so it's never really going to be completely perfect, but they're fairly minimal. For instance, sometimes the power window switches don't work. Usually they do, but sometimes they don't. You'll be driving along, window won't go up, and then the next day it goes up just fine. They work more often than not. Also, sometimes you're driving the car and a warning flashes that tells you a brake light is out. So you run to the back of the car to see, and the brake lights are not out. They're just fine, but there's some electrical misconnection. Now, another thing I've noticed is this car is leaking coolant just a little bit. When I first got it, the coolant light would come on every couple weeks, but I took it to a shop, I had them do some work on it. They said they fixed it, and now the coolant light comes on every couple months. It's still leaking, but very, very slightly, but it's there. However, those are all minor problems, and truthfully, mechanically, this car has been great. It got a brand new clutch in 2015, new turbocharger in 2018, and it's never been a problem for me. Like I said, starts up every single time without fail. The only other notable flaw of this car is kind of an unusual cosmetic one. When I first got it, there was a black rock guard mounted directly in front of the rear wheels, I guess to make it look more Porsche-like, but I wanted it to look totally stock, so I wanted to pull it off. But when we got in there, we discovered it had been painted around at some point, and so taking it off wasn't really all that easy. I don't exactly remember, but Elite Finish, my cosmetic shop that does everything, they made up a little blue wrap piece that just covered this and perfectly matched the exterior color of the car. You can see it if you look really close. You can see it from here, but if you look at from here, you can't see it. And in fact, nobody that I've talked to has ever noticed this on the car. They did such a great job matching the color, but it is there. The only other potential flaw is that you can't register this car in California. You'll notice that I have a Massachusetts license plate on it. I live some of the year in Massachusetts, and I've registered this car there because California won't allow it unless you get it CARB certified, which is possible for the RS2, and the shop that does it quoted me about $10,000 to get it done and get it fully California legal. But since I could just register it in Massachusetts, I never really bothered. It's possible, but not ideal, and if you live in California and you want this car, you probably should register it somewhere else. Other than that, this RS2 has been great. It's a special car with an amazing history and backstory, like I told you. I have used it a ton and enjoyed it a lot, and it's never really given me trouble or issues. It's been a great, fun car for a great, fun 2.5 years. I've truly loved this car, and I'll miss it. And now you can buy it on Cars and Bids. All right, last thing, I wanted to drive the RS2. Now, I already gave a review of the driving experience when I first got it 2.5 years ago, but since I'm about to sell it, I wanted to kind of talk about how it drives now for potential buyers, but also as like a sum of all the things that I've discovered and learned about the driving experience of this car over 2.5 years and 4,000 miles. So here we go. First off, one of the things that people always talk about with the RS2 is how its 0 to 30 acceleration time was incredibly fast, faster faster even than the McLaren F1. That was a big thing about this car. I've never understood how that could be possible. This car has horrible turbo lag. It's one of the most ridiculous things about it. You floor this car at 2,000 RPM and you are waiting and waiting and waiting. Now, it is explosive when you get up about 4,500, 5,000 RPM. Then it feels really fast, and that's how this car gets to whatever 0 to 60 time it has. High 4s, low 5s. It's because of that 4,000 to 6,000 RPM boost. But the 0 to 30 time, you presume most of that would be at kind of a lower RPM range, so I'm not really sure how it was quicker 0 to 30 than all these other cars. I think the goal was to indicate, hey, this has all-wheel drive, so it does these fast starts, which was uncommon at the time, but even then, the turbo lag is really obvious. Now, I don't want to mention the turbo lag as a drawback. I think it's cool. It's like charming. You know, none of these old 90s cars are fast by modern standards. Even the McLaren F1, they're not really all that fast, but it's cool. It has this old school charm to it, and these old turbo laggy cars don't exist anymore, and I think having an early turbo with the lag, it kind of feels like the early 90s, and I think that adds to the charm of the car. It wouldn't be fast whether it had lag or not, but adding the lag makes it kind of weird and cool. Now, my favorite thing about this car, unquestionably, was the way that it handled. I always liked the way, you know, it's a little car. I'm a big fan of kind of littler cars. And this is that. Like, this is a relatively small, kind of nimble little car, and the engine is pretty far out over the front wheels, and this platform was developed for front wheel drive, and so this is an all-wheel drive car, but it's still not like a rear wheel drive car. And so it has kind of the deck stacked against it from day one in terms of handling, but it actually handles great because you have this hydraulic steering that's relatively eager, it's well-tuned, suspension is good, well-poised, quick steering whack, quick to turn, and the car itself is little. And so in terms of actual handling beyond just the steering feel, the car is fun to throw around. It's not huge, it's little, it's tossable, and it feels pretty eager to go around just about any corner. My friends and I go up to the mountains and do like kind of canyon drives, you know, in the morning sometimes. And even though I have the Ford GT, occasionally I will take this car because it's just so much fun to throw around. It grips well, it handles well, it's very predictable because it's so small, and I've always loved the steering and handling aspect of this car. With that said, it lags behind an E30 BMW 3 Series. Those cars were a little smaller, a little lighter, and just a little nimbler. This isn't quite on that level dynamically, but it's so much better than so many modern cars. It's just fun. Also worth pointing out, this car is surprisingly stable at higher speeds. You get up going pretty fast on a highway, and it's like planted and stable. It was clearly made for Germany. I mean, all German performance cars are like that, and this one is too. The manual shifter and transmission action is, I would say, fine. It's not amazing, but it's very good. The clutch is an aftermarket clutch. It's a South Bend Stage 3 clutch. I don't know what that means. But what I do know is it's a little harder to press than I would want. Engagement point is very obvious, but it's just, there's a little bit of a push to get it around. Now, going through the gears, the gear lever situation is great. All the gears are pretty close. Everything is pretty tight in the gear lever area, and so each gear is like very defined, doesn't feel rubbery. Pretty easy to rev match in this car. Again, a bit of a heavy push of the clutch, but you can rev up pretty quickly and get it into gear fairly quickly as well. Truthfully, this car is a lot of fun to drive. It always has been. I've always enjoyed getting behind the wheel of the RS2. It makes you just a little bit happier. It's a totally different old school driving experience. One thing to note about the drive, by the way, it's little in here. I can fit no problem in the front, but the back is tight. And one of the things I learned is I had kind of bought this thinking maybe this could be a family car for me. It's possible, but it's tight. It's not like the larger cars of today. This is an A4 size car, an Audi A4 size car, and these days that could be a family car. It's grown over the years, but it was pretty small in this era. Overall, I've really enjoyed driving this car. I think it's been fun to use, fun to drive, and again, never given me any issues or problems. It's always been a nice, drivable, usable car, and I don't know, it's great. It's a great car. I don't know why I'm selling it, other than that I want to try out some other great cars, and you know, life is short. So I hope the next owner enjoys it as much as I am. And so that's my Audi RS2 Avant. This is one of the coolest fast wagons of all time, and I have truly loved this car, and I've loved owning it for a little while. But it's time to move on to something else. And now you can buy my RS2 only on Cars and Bids.